Hello and welcome everybody. It's a beautiful day here at Seven Summits Lodge with Doug Anderson, the food and beverage manager here. Christopher, he's our lead bartender and master mixologist. We're doing a national broadcast today for his eggnog recipe. It's kind of the tradition here at our lodge where Christopher takes members' orders all holiday season and is pretty much in the business of making eggnog for all his off days. So it's a real easy recipe which we posted online if you want to try to go ahead and make it while we're doing it or create it yourselves later. Before I worked here, I had a lot of eggnog that you buy at the supermarket, and it's night and day when you taste homemade eggnog. So I've already made a batch for me and my kids this last weekend, and it's super easy. So Christopher's going to run you through how to make it, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Feel free to add some apricot brandy to it. Christopher makes a nice cocktail called Santa's Little Helper, where we put some cream de cocoa and some brandy in it. Brandy whiskey
and rum.
But lots of stuff you can do with eggnog. So we'll turn it over to Christopher. Enjoy, have fun, and learn something new.
All right, so yes, we are going to be making homemade eggnog. The big difference that you get, for those of you who've never had homemade, big difference between homemade and the stuff you buy in the store. The stuff you buy in the store is much thicker, much denser, and just very heavy. Homemade, it's a lot lighter in body. It's still very rich, but it's a lot lighter in body and a lot smoother. The main difference is being, to sell it commercially, it has to be pasteurized, it has to be cooked. And so when you cook the eggs, it thickens it up. The other being that one of the key steps in the process, which you'll see in a moment, is you take the egg whites and you beat them until they're stiff. You add a lot of volume, a lot of air, and that dissipates over the course of a couple of days. And so when you buy it in the store, they obviously, it's not made that day, and so that air is all gone, and so it's much denser and much fuller. But I've already got all the ingredients pulled out. It's much easier to get everything ready in advance, just because you are handling raw eggs. You want to make it as quickly as possible so you can get it back into the refrigerator. Raw eggs, raw dairy. The milk and the cream I've got in cups here. I've got all the spices pulled out, sugar, and then the eggs. And basically the best way to do this is you get everything pulled out, and then because you're handling raw eggs, you either wear gloves or you want to wash your hands immediately before and immediately after handling the raw eggs. So I got everything set out. I put on gloves. If you don't have gloves, like I said, wash your hands immediately before and after. But the first step you're going to take, and you're going to separate the eggs into two separate bowls. If you have a stand mixer, like we do here, put the whites into the stand mixer. It's much, much easier. If you don't have a stand mixer, a hand mixer works, or even like the little crank mixers work fine. You can whisk it by hand, but it takes a lot of elbow grease. It takes a lot more effort. So if you have a mixer of some sort, it'll make your life a lot easier to beat those egg whites. So the easiest way, or the standard way of separating egg whites, some people have little devices for separating egg whites and yolks. I just do it all by hand, but you're going to crack the white on a flat surface, or the egg rather, and you're going to separate it out. And so you take the two halves, and you kind of pass the yolk back and forth, and let the egg white kind of just bleed off the edge there. And you can kind of scrape it off if it comes back. But if you do it back and forth a couple of times, you get all the egg white into one bowl, and you put the yolk into a separate one, and you're good. It's a very good idea if you're doing it by hand like this to, if you have one that cracks really nicely and evenly, to save it, just in case you get one, which we might see in a little bit, where it'll break unevenly, and it's just not good for doing the back and forth process. And so you have another one you can just grab to do that effect. But just a little back and forth. Usually it'll come off in one big clump, and then you can kind of go back and get the rest of it with a little back and forth. One thing you obviously want to be very careful not to get any shells in there. It will happen from time to time. Also, if the yolk falls in, you can take the eggshell and kind of scoop the yolk back out. If you're very careful, it won't break, and you can go back to separating again. If it breaks, again, you can scoop it out and just try not to mix it too much. If a little bit of the egg white goes in with the yolks, that's not a big deal. But you don't want the yolk in with the egg white, because that'll keep it from whipping up into a nice foam. You want all the yolk. See, this one, the yolk just broke on the straining process. So a little bit of the egg whites can go in here. It's not a problem. As far as the process of making eggnog goes, this is the most time-consuming part of it, separating the whites and yolks. It's actually a pretty quick, pretty easy recipe, but it does take some time to do this. So you could even do this in advance if you wanted, but there's not really much purpose to it, because this is going to be the primary part of making the eggnog. And as far as freshness goes, ideally you want to make this the day of or the day before you're going to serve it. It's perfectly safe to keep refrigerated for up to, I'd say, about a week. But so here we go. This is what I was talking about, where the shell broke a little too much. So I'm just going to use one of the shells that I saved and use that for the process, because it would have been really difficult to try to strain that out with this shell. But yeah, so up to a week is perfectly safe as long as it's refrigerated, but it's best within the first few days, just because that, like I said, that air, that foam kind of dissipates over the course of a couple of days. And you want to have it in a container that you can either shake it or stir it, because the solids from the spices will separate out to the bottom, and the egg foam will separate out to the top. So you want to be able to stir it and shake it each time you're about to pour some. But it's pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward, and honestly, it's kind of fun. I mean, after you make 30 or 40 gallons, you get a little tired of it, but by the time the next year rolls around, I'm always ready for more. And it's fun for me because there's so many people out there that don't think that they like eggnog because they've only ever had stuff from the store. And it's a lot of fun to kind of change people's opinions and introduce them to what eggnog is supposed to taste like. I cannot tell you how many people I've converted over the years. Because one of the things that I do is, when people come into the restaurant and, I mention like, oh yeah, it's eggnog season. And they always tell me that, I don't like eggnog. And it's like, well, have you ever had real eggnog? Because if you haven't, you don't actually know. And I mean, there's always going to be a few people who don't like it. But most people have this idea of what eggnog tastes like. And if they've never had the real thing, that's a kind of a false idea. But it's a classic drink, pretty common in like German and Scandinavian background countries. Like Doug mentioned, the apricot brandy is kind of the traditional German serving with it. But I do it with spiced rum. I do it with whiskey. I've done like a couple more complex drinks using like Tulaka or black walnut liqueur. It's good with Kahlua. It's good with coffee. Honestly, it's good on its own, just as a non-alcoholic drink. The recipe I gave you is kind of a base recipe that I use. Part of the reason I use that recipe is because it's really easily expandable. Right now, I'm actually doing a double batch, twice what your recipe is. So instead of that recipe will make a little over a quart, this one will make probably about almost 3/4. Because I'm making this for the restaurant for over the weekend. But you can expand it really easily into even a triple batch, which makes a little over a gallon, which is great, especially if you have to make quite a bit of it like I do. Anything beyond that, and it gets a little too big for the bowls and the containers that you're using. Once you get beyond that, by the time you mix everything into a bowl, there's not room for it. If you have bigger bowls, you can maybe pull it off, but it's kind of difficult. So all the eggs are separated. Pull off my gloves, get rid of that. So the whites I'm going to throw onto the stand mixer. I'm not going to start it just yet because I want time to get everything else together. But around the time I'm finishing up this, I'm going to start the stand mixer going and give it about a minute to 2 minutes to get the egg whites really frothy, really thick. Just a standard whisk, and kind of whisk the yolks in there a little bit. And then I usually like to add about half the liquid first, after the yolks are gone. And you can kind of mix that together. If you add the dry ingredients, just the yolks, it'll kind of puff up a little too much. It doesn't smooth out very well. So if you get about half the liquid in there, and then you can add, for the half batch, it'd be a half teaspoon. I'm doing a double batch, so it's 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of allspice, and 1 teaspoon of nutmeg, and then a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then you can just kind of mix it in there. And again, at each step, you're just going to make sure it mixes thoroughly. You want everything to be homogeneous to an extent. It's going to separate out as you go, so you're going to have to mix it a few times. And then now you can add your sugar, and then you'll add the other half of the liquid after that. But you want that solid, or that liquid base in there before you start mixing in all these solids. Whisk this up real good, make sure that the sugar's getting dissolved, sure the spices are evenly distributed. When you look, you'll have a fairly dark, like sort of tannish brown color, lots of those spices distributed throughout, and then you can add the other half of your liquid. The milk and cream can be mixed together. It doesn't matter what order you add them, you just need to make sure you have the right amount of each. So at this point, it looks almost like what you would get at the store as far as the texture and the color. That adding the egg whites is really what's going to make this significantly different and special. So I'm going to start that going. You're not going to be able to hear me for a minute probably, but we'll get this going and get it whipped up. Continue whisking as you go, make sure it stays mixed together, and then there'll be a final mix once you pour the egg whites in. So after about a minute, you'll see the egg whites are coming out to a fairly stiff foam. It'll peak up if you have a second whisk you can put in there. It'll kind of peak up. But that's the texture you want, and that's what you're adding into this to really make it perfect. You're going to scrape out, get as much of that as you can. Again, it will dissipate over a couple of days, but the more of it you have to start, the better, especially if you're doing it right before a party or if you're getting ready to serve it immediately. And you'll kind of try to drop it into there. It's not going to fully mix this way. It'll just kind of stay floating on the top. But when you start pouring it into containers, you can try to even out how much is going into each container. I usually will use the measuring cup that I use just to kind of pour it in. But I'm going to do one into a little glass here so you can kind of see what it'll look like. You can see it right now it's mixed, but over the next minute or so as it sits, that froth is going to separate out to the top. And so it's like immediately when you're ready to serve it, you want to be pouring it into that or shaking it up and stirring it as you go. But we'll see, these are each a quart container, so by the time this is done, it should just about fill all three. And we'll have the eggnog that we want. So I'm going to, getting into this, I'm going to whisk it one more time and then get the whisk out of the way. But this way you can kind of use this measuring cup. A smaller measuring cup actually works a little bit better because you can get really down in there, but this is about right. And then when you get to the very bottom of the bowl, when you can't really scoop it up anymore, you can just pour it into your measuring cup and then pour it into your container. If you are using a bigger container or like a pitcher, you can pour it directly from the bowl, but it can get a little messy if you're not careful. I'll try that way, so you can see. But it's very thick, it's very rich. Fill up all three containers. I got a tiny bit left, so I'm gonna pour that for me. But as you can see, it's already getting that foam at the very top. It's really nice and really delicious, but if you're trying to make it look ideal and look completely mixed, you gotta do it right before you serve it. So we're gonna take a little taste, make sure it turned out great. Perfect every time. But yeah, so what, like I said, there's a lot of different things you can do with it. It's great in cocktails. It's great with coffee. You can actually steam it. If you have like an espresso machine, you can steam it up and do like a hot eggnog that way. That's kind of a fun thing to do with it. If you're wanting to make a batch with alcohol in it, it actually does work a little better if you put the alcohol in as you make it, because the flavors will bond together better. I usually do it without alcohol, especially for the restaurant, because that way if people want it with apricot brandy, I can do that. If people want it with whiskey, if people want it with rum, whatever they want in there, I can make it to order. It's just a lot easier than trying to make a separate batch with each liquor in it. But if you are going to be making it with liquor in it to let it kind of congeal together, just substitute out a little bit of the milk for whatever booze you're going to put in there. So if you're going to put a half a cup of rum in there, take out a half a cup of milk, and so on and so forth. It just because you don't want it to get too thinned out, and the milk is the closest texture-wise to the alcohol. But there's really no wrong way to do it. Honestly, as far as the drinks go, I haven't found any pairing that I don't like. I mean, maybe gin would be a little weird, but the apricot brandy adds just a nice touch of fruitiness to it that works better than you would think it would. When I first came across that idea last year, I thought it sounded like an odd pairing, but once you taste it, the flavors mesh perfectly. Whiskey and rum are more common in the U.S. You can do it with like a flavored vodka, whipped cream vodka, chocolate vodka, something like that. There's the sky's the limit as far as trying different things. So hopefully you'll try some different ideas. Hopefully you're making a batch with me right now, and hopefully you enjoy it. It's a lot of fun to do. It's a lot of fun to make. A lot of fun to share. I like to share things that I enjoy with other people. So I hope you're making some along with me, or you're going to make some for friends. And yeah, I don't know what else to tell you. Just enjoy your eggnog. I always do.